From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson with you, and coming up today, K-State's Gregg Ibendahl and Dan O'Brien will talk about the unprecedented drop in crude oil futures prices yesterday, trading in the negative for the first time ever, and the repercussions of these historically low oil prices for agriculture. Several angles on that Gregg and Dan will take up. Then the latest edition of FSA Coffee Talk, where Bob White of the Farm Service Agency State Office reminds you producers that USDA direct and guaranteed loans are still available to cover spring cash flow needs. And this week, K-State's Charlie Lee discusses a new study on tracking bird and bat losses around wind turbines. All this and more next on Agriculture Today.
Make hand washing a healthy habit everywhere you go. Wash your hands with soap and water for at least 20 seconds, especially after going to the bathroom, before, during, and after preparing food, and before eating. If soap and water aren't available, use a hand sanitizer that has at least 60% alcohol. Life is better with clean hands. A message from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention.
Thanks for being along with us once again for Agriculture Today. And with every passing day, there seems to be something new on the economic scene for unfortunate reasons, of course. And the latest is another economic irregularity having to do with the crude oil market, which yesterday, for the first time ever, actually traded futures contract, that is, in the red, in negative territory. And it's such an oddity that we thought it important to look into it today with our guests now. Dan O'Brien, along with us each week, as you know, grain market economist, K-State Research and Extension. Joining Dan, Gregg Ibendahl, farm management economist with K-State Research and Extension. Gregg, we'll start with you. We are familiar with the difficulties that have befallen the oil industry of late. A double whammy, COVID-19 coupled with an oil war across the seas.
Yeah, it's kind of a unique situation. So with the COVID-19 thing going on right now, obviously a lot of people are sitting at home, which means demand for oil has went down at least like 25% or more. So that was one thing kind of pressuring prices. But then at the same time, Russia and Saudi Arabia kind of got into a little match about who was actually going to agree to cuts to kind of match that level of demand. Russia kind of got mad at Saudi Arabia, and they said they weren't going to agree to that, and they actually increased their production. Well, the Saudis kind of came back at them and said, well, if you're going to raise your production, we're going to do the same thing. And they kind of got into a war about increasing production when a time when demand was falling. And that was a bad situation. They had since kind of come to a truce and had agreed to some cuts. But, with the situation with demand so much, even what they agreed to was really not enough to kind of prop up prices. So we've been seeing oil go down really low. We got down below, even before this current situation happened, below $20 a barrel.
So this has been coming on for several weeks. Oil prices and fuel prices, therefore, remain historically low. But then you look at the crude oil futures, Dan, and yesterday, one of the contracts, the May contract, fell to negative $37. How does this happen?
Well, you had a situation with the last closing day of trade for the West Texas Intermediate crude oil price coming up today. And the day before that, prices had fallen 37. Actually, the low was $40.60 cents below zero. It was trading negative. But in essence, those traders that were going to have oil delivered against them, and it'd be short or sellers who'd been selling a long time, a whole bunch of them, delivering against anybody that had a long contract, they were going to deliver on them, force them to take physical delivery, and that contract is settled physically. So they would have to take barrels of oil, and the locations where that would happen, primary one being Cushing, Oklahoma, not full yet, but as Gregg had alluded to, the storage situation at Cushing is, again, the maximum storage is apparently about 92 million barrels, and they're at 55 now, and it looks like people are anticipating that's going to get filled up. So they're seeking to avoid taking physical delivery. Now, it's interesting. There's Brent crude oil. That's settled by cash, and it did not go negative. Well, it certainly was low, but it did not go negative. Another thing to look at in the futures, when you look at West Texas Intermediate oil futures, now yesterday they had dropped, again, 40.37 under. Here overnight, they're at $4.70 under last time I looked. So you had a panicky situation happening in that market on the part of people that were going to be forced to take delivery. There is carry. Now, the June contract is at 15.82, still positive. So you've got people trying to push physical delivery away off into the future. And it's interesting to me that it crunched so low yesterday during the trade, and now that it's mitigated some, still negative, but you have a fluid market with a lot of uncertainty and a physical delivery mechanism. And eventually, if you have the chance to talk about it, I'd like to discuss how that differs or is similar or differs from what we have in the grain futures.
Want to get to that, but want to ask both of you, from the economist vantage point, what if a futures contract, such as this crude oil futures contract we're talking of today, expires in the red? What transpires then?
Well, it has to even out. I guess, Eric, you're asking about something that has never happened.
Right.
And at the end of the trade today, we will see what happens. Even though this is mitigated some, it's still setting negative. So it'll be really interesting to see what happens at the end of the day today when the May contract goes off. Now, again, this has implications for cash oil prices all throughout the Western Plains, and that includes Kansas. So what you're seeing is a backup in that whole distribution system that will eventually affect whether we can profitably pump oil in Kansas oil fields. And it'll have an impact on the ethanol industry as well. And I'll just say that quickly. The Renewable Fuels Association came out yesterday, had a announcement basically saying that 46% of the U.S. ethanol production is now offline. They're anticipating that prices get down to 56 cents a gallon. They're at 93 right now for ethanol. So they're anticipating a major drop for the rest of the year. And basically 40% of U.S. corn, 1/3 U.S. grain sorghum goes into ethanol plants. So if you chop those amounts in half, you'll be having a major impact on the grain markets. That's absent the U.S. economy being able to unwind itself and start moving forward, and energy demand starting to be positive again.
Always looking for that proverbial silver lining here. Gregg, in that we've seen this development in the oil futures trade, and we've seen oil prices at low levels for quite a spell now, this does open opportunity for users, such as agricultural producers, to take advantage of bargains, if you will, in the energy trade.
Yes, I think there's both, some short-term benefits, but certainly some long-term detriments that's going to happen to agriculture because of this. So, short-term benefits with oil down around $20 a barrel, that really translates to about a road diesel price of less than $2 a gallon. And it also translates to highway gasoline probably in about the $1.60 range. So, short term, that's a great thing. We're going to have really cheap diesel fuel and gasoline this summer, which is great. But unfortunately, when oil is around $20 a barrel, producers in the U.S. really can't make any money. Fracking has been a wonderful thing for consumers in the U.S. because it has really stabilized prices. It basically took oil prices down from the $100 range into the mid-50 range. And we have $2 a gallon gas for the last couple of years. That's great. People know what they're going to pay for gas. There's really not much risk of that going up or down, and people were pretty happy with that. At $50 a barrel, the fracking industry can barely make money. I mean, they're probably covering costs, but they're a heavily indebted industry. A lot of debt floating around out there. When oil drops below that, like it is now, $20 a barrel, that's going to put a dagger into the heart of the fracking industry. We're going to see a lot of our U.S. oil production, I think, be idled, at least short term, maybe long term even. It's going to take a while, I think, to get these things going back up again. But in the short term, we're going to enjoy really good diesel fuel prices. I anticipate fertilizer prices come fall to be really cheap. I mean, we may see historically low fertilizer prices in the fall. So that's good short term. Long term, though, I think that's going to put Saudi Arabia and Russia back in the driver's seat when it comes to producing oil. And again, we could be held hostage by them in the future. So long term, I don't like this $20 a barrel oil stuff at all.
for the relative short term, then producers don't necessarily need to get in a hurry as far as advanced pricing fuel resources or fertilizer resources. This will be around for a while, you're saying, Gregg.
Yeah, I think so. The only issue with the fertilizer is, so they're a major producer of the potash fertilizer. So DAP and MAP potentially were impacted in China when this whole coronavirus came about. I think those plants are back in operation again. So potentially there could be some supply issues with our potash type fertilizers, but I haven't seen that yet. But that's something to watch out for going forward.
All right. Well, what happened yesterday in oil futures turned heads, obviously. And that probably, Dan, got agricultural producers to wondering, could a negative trade in a grain futures contract or other commodity futures contract ever go into the red such as it did in the oil futures? Is that even plausible given how agricultural commodities work?
I think it's going to be more difficult to ever see happen. And here's why. Well, we have built into our futures contracts, mitigating mechanisms. All this discussion we had on variable storage rates in wheat contracts, and now the fixed storage rates, the transition to shipping certificates for grains, all those are mechanisms to soften the blow. It takes away the punitive hammer of loadout. So when someone delivers on a selling contract, so on a short contract, and they sell, and a long has to take it, the longs on the grain contracts have ways to basically take that paper warehouse receipt, pay interest on it, not have to go to the cash market. If we didn't have those, if we had forced loadout, yes, you'd be much more likely to see this. Even with that, it's a lot easier to build ag bags, temporary storage for grain, than it is to build temporary storage for oil.
Well, it was an eye-opening turn of events yesterday with those oil futures trading in the negative, first time in history. Interesting perspectives on all of this as this would relate to agriculture. Dan, Gregg, many thanks for joining us right here.
Thanks, Eric.
Along with us from K-State Agricultural Economics, grain market economist Dan O'Brien and farm management economist Gregg Ibendahl. You're listening to Agriculture Today, and we'll be back with more on the K-State Radio Network.
When you are in need of timely, reliable, and trusted information, K-State Research and Extension is here. Whether it's organizing people, information, or resources, they have the necessary tools. Community comes first for K-State Research and Extension. For more information and to connect with your county's extension agents, visit www.ksre.k-state.edu.
Welcome back to Agriculture Today and our regular segment visiting with staff from the Farm Service Agency, state headquarters for Kansas. We call it FSA Coffee Talk. And just to remind, the regular USDA Farm Loan Program remains very much intact and in operation, in addition to everything else that's going on regarding the response to COVID, some of the specialized programs that are being trafficked through the USDA right now. The loan program still there and available for you producers to consider. We're reminded of that now by Bob White. Bob is the farm loan chief here in the state of Kansas for the Farm Service Agency. And just stepping back, Bob, and talking not only of you, but the rest of your crew there at the state headquarters, the status of FSA operations under COVID-19, you say you've been plugging away pretty steadily here.
That's true, Eric. We're actually very fortunate to still be able to be providing our programs. Offices around the state are continuing to be in operation, assisting customers. However, for the protection of our customers and our employees both, currently we're not able to permit customer access into our offices. Instead, we would encourage customers to call our offices to discuss any questions or needs. And then additionally, of course, we're using email and other online tools whenever possible to continue to provide services.
Now, producers may well be considering their credit needs at this time of the year, and given the economic impacts of COVID-19, they might find that commercial loans are somewhat limited in their availability. That's where your program can step in.
Correct. Certainly, this is a busy time of year for farm credit purposes, and obviously a very unique time in our history economically. We would encourage producers to first discuss credit needs with your commercial lender, and then those who might be experiencing some sort of limitations on obtaining adequate commercial credit, we would ask them to contact FSA or your lender about our guarantee or direct loan programs.
And we've had the occasion to visit about these program options before, Bob, but you might refresh us on how the direct and the guaranteed loan programs differ.
Certainly. Our guaranteed loan programs allow lenders to provide credit to farmers who do not meet the lender's normal underwriting criteria. Farmers and ranchers can apply for these guaranteed loans through your local lender, and then the lender arranges for the guarantee with FSA. Under a guarantee, we can provide a guarantee up to 95% of any future loss on a loan for the lender. That allows the lender to provide that credit where they would not be able to do otherwise without a guarantee. Guaranteed loans can be used for both real estate and operating loan purposes. Total amounts can be up to $1,776,000. Repayment terms for guaranteed loans vary depending on the loan type, the collateral, and the producer's ability to repay the loan. And then for operators who might be unable to obtain credit needs through a guaranteed loan, we also do offer our direct farm ownership and operating loan programs. These can be used to establish, maintain, or strengthen an existing farm or ranch. The maximum loan amount for a direct farm ownership or real estate loans is $600,000, while the maximum guarantee or maximum amount for operating loans is $400,000. Repayment terms for these loans also vary based on circumstances, but operating loans are normally repaid within 7 years, and farm ownership loans don't exceed 40 years. And of course, anyone interested in either of these, guarantee or direct loans, we encourage you to contact your local commercial lender or our Farm Service Agency loan offices to discuss these credit needs.
Have to ask, Bob, for it's a question that does arise anytime we speak of the loan program. With all the complications brought on by COVID-19 and questions, is the funding for the FSA guaranteed or direct loans adequate for the year?
Yeah, that's a very good question, and it's a pertinent time of the year to take a look at that. We're actually halfway through our fiscal year. Our fiscal year runs October 1st to September 30th. Where we are right here as of March 31st, halfway through that period, demand for our loan programs was up considerably from the previous fiscal year. Currently, we're at 165% of last year's usage on direct loans. We're running at 134% of usage for guaranteed loans. Of course, we're, as we all know, in uncharted waters regarding how COVID-19 will impact credit needs for the balance of the fiscal year. However, our best estimate at this time is that we'll have adequate funds in reserve for all of our guaranteed loans and sufficient funds available for direct operating loans. We presently have funding for direct real estate loans, and we think we'll be successful in requesting some additional funds. But it is possible we'll temporarily be short of direct real estate funds at some point during the fiscal year.
All bets are off this year, so that contingency in mind. To this point, we've been talking about those interested in obtaining new FSA loans, guaranteed or direct, to those existing FSA borrowers. We all understand the complications that COVID-19 has brought on economically and otherwise. And how would you suggest those borrowers proceed if they are anticipating being late or just flat out unable to make their scheduled FSA loan payments, again, considering COVID-19?
Well, as you said, Eric, all bets are off. Obviously we're all searching for answers and hoping for the best. But, it's something we're taking a look at. It's obviously a very important and timely topic with FSA. To some degree, everyone's going to be impacted economically by the present crisis. We're having discussions with our national office nearly daily, looking for creative opportunities to try to assist our borrowers. We have a substantial number of options available presently Those would include extension of payments, deferring payments to the maturity of the loan, or rescheduling the loan over the remaining number of years originally scheduled. And as stated, we're talking to our national office daily and taking a hard look at our availability and looking at creative ways that we might be able to do some additional things. Every operation is obviously unique, and there's certain requirements must be met for any kind of servicing options. So the most important thing I would encourage is any borrower, direct or guarantee, who envisions some challenges meeting upcoming payments, contact their guarantee lender or the local FSA farm loan office to begin that discussion as early as possible and try to work towards some solutions.
That really is the important thought here, that producers, whether they're interested in taking out a new loan or figuring out ways to service an existing FSA loan, talk with those local folk via email, via phone, the mode of the day anyway, but be sure to sort all of this out with the FSA personnel at that local counter.
That's true, Eric. It's all about communication, certainly in these times as much or more so than any times. And speaking of these times, I do hope that yourself and all the listeners are safe and healthy above all else.
You likewise. Thanks for taking the time to visit with us right here, Bob. And we will talk with you again on down the line, hopefully as more things are settling back into something resembling a normal mode. Always appreciate hearing from you.
Thank you.
Bob White with us. He's the Farm Loan Chief with the Farm Service Agency here in the state of Kansas. All of this can be sorted through, again, with your local FSA staffers. Take full advantage of what they can share in the way of USDA loan availability. Now, in case you missed this, you agricultural producers with marketing assistance loans through the USDA now have more time to repay on those loans, thanks to the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act of 2020. Those loans now mature at 12 months rather than 9 months. That flexibility is available for most commodities, according to the USDA. Extending the maturity affords producers more time to market the commodity and repay their loan at a later time. This maturity extension applies to the non-recourse loans for crop years 18, 19, and 20. Eligible open loans must be in good standing with a maturity date of March the 31st of this year or later, or new crop year loans requested by September the 30th. As we've talked of before, placing commodities under these marketing assistance loans, in effect, provides a producer interim financing to meet cash flow needs without having to sell commodities when market prices are low, then allowing the producer to store that production for more orderly marketing throughout the year as that would shape up. These loans, again, are considered non-recourse because the commodity is pledged as loan collateral, producers having the option of delivering that collateral to the Commodity Credit Corporation for repayment of the outstanding loan at maturity. Once more, if you have questions about these new marketing loan allowances, bring them up to your local FSA personnel. That is the latest FSA Coffee Talk, featured every other Tuesday here on Agriculture Today. We'll be back with more after this break over the K-State Radio Network.
Social distancing slows the spread of coronavirus, so we should all stay home to lower the risk for everyone. More info at coronavirus.gov. Let's all do our part, because we're all #AloneTogether, brought to you by the Ad Council.
Once again, in our 96th year of broadcast service to agriculture in Kansas and the Central Plains, this is the K-State Radio Network, and you're listening to Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson with you. Today's agricultural news headlines for you now, courtesy in part of DTN. This week's crop progress and condition report for Kansas out of the USDA reads like this. For the week ending this past Sunday, our topsoil moisture supplies were at 5% surplus, 65% adequate, and 30% short to very short. Subsoil moisture at 4% surplus, 72% adequate, and 24% 20% short to very short. The condition of the Kansas winter wheat crop at 46% good to excellent, 36% fair, 18% at poor to very poor. Winter wheat jointing at 50%, that's behind the 57% for the 5-year average. And corn planting in Kansas at 13% seeded, that's behind the 20% average for this date. As for the national view on corn planting and winter wheat condition, we turn now to the USDA's Stephanie Ho.
A mid-April cold wave took its toll on winter wheat.
First of all, I want to take a look at the winter wheat heading numbers. That's real important when looking at some of the vulnerable acreage. And nationally, 14% of the U.S. winter wheat acreage had headed by April 19th. That's 1 point behind the 5-year average, but well ahead of where we were at this time a year ago when just 8% of the crop had headed.
That was USDA meteorologist Brad Rippey.
Looking at the key production states across the central and southern Great Plains, notably, we saw a big increase in the heading acreage.
He says the fastest progress occurred in Texas and Oklahoma, two of the states that also showed large declines in condition.
Nationally, the good to excellent ratings for winter wheat down quite a bit from last week. 57% is the current number. Last week, we were at 62% good to excellent. We're also seeing an increase in the very poor to poor rating up to 13% from just 10% a week ago.
Rippey says there is modest progress in some corn production areas.
Nationally, 7% of the intended corn acreage planted by April 19th. That is behind the 5-year average of 9%, but ahead of last year's 5%.
In the southern production states,
pretty nice jumps in overall planting before some heavy rain hit. At this point, we see Texas still leading the way, 64% of its acreage planted. That's ahead of the 5-year average of 57%.
Meanwhile, in the Midwest,
we see at least a little bit of planting in many states, except in the northern Corn Belt. Still no planting taking place for corn yet in states like Michigan, North Dakota, Ohio, and South Dakota. And in terms of the Midwest only, the state with the greatest amount of planting progress at this point is Missouri, 11% planted. 5-year average is 25%. Illinois is second on the Midwestern planting list.
This is Stephanie Ho for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C.
And incidentally, later on this week, K-State's Romulo Lolato will be back with us to look at the latest concerning freeze damage to Kansas winter wheat. And the ethanol industry could see about $10 billion in losses as a result of the COVID-19 economic stall this year, according to a new analysis released yesterday by the Renewable Fuels Association. K-State's Dan O'Brien referred to this earlier. RFA President and CEO Jeff Cooper said that while that industry is frustrated not to have received aid from the USDA at the end of last week, there may be other chances going forward. The USDA had said at that time ethanol didn't make the aid cut because the agency had limited funds. Cooper said, I think there'll be additional rounds of assistance coming from the USDA. Next up for you, this week's edition of Milk Lines with K-State dairy specialist Mike Brook. Mike?
Today we want to visit with our Kansas dairy farmers concerning getting ready for the summer. Heat stress will be upon our dairy herds before we know it. And I think as we move into summer, one of the important things for you to remember as a dairy farmer is that milk margin is going to be really tough to come by. So as we look at what heat stress does to our dairy herd each year in terms of level of milk production, I think we need to be concerned about that. We need to be preparing now so that we minimize that effect on our herd. It's going to be very important this year, I think, to try to keep milk flow up. So we're shipping as many pounds of milk as possible. And with the milk prices we're receiving, to try to keep cash flow going on the dairy farm and keeping our business viable. So some things that I want to encourage you to think about in terms of heat stress on your animals is making sure that you do your annual maintenance. I know a lot of times we wait maybe until in June or even a little bit later than that to get some of this maintenance done. But maybe now is a good time to do that, and making sure we get those fans clean, make sure we check the cooling fans, make sure they're running. If there's belts that need to be replaced, that those get replaced. If there is equipment that needs to be replaced, that we're working on that. Hopefully we've already made plans and have that equipment delivered on the farm so we can actually get it installed. Obviously, with what we're experiencing with the virus, there may be some issues with shipping some things in the normal time frame. So make sure you plan ahead if you are going to need to bring some supplies onto the farm to take care of those cooling systems. It's probably a good time to start checking those soaker lines you got over the freestalls as well, making sure that they're operational. If there's nozzles that need to be replaced or just if the system needs cleaning, making sure you get that done so it's fully functional and ready to go when we start experiencing warmer days than what we have at this point. Also want to encourage you to pay special attention to the holding pin cooling systems. Maybe that'd be the place to start on your dairy as you try to bring those systems up to operation. That's where cows experience a lot of heat stress early just because we pack animals in there fairly tightly. And even at lower temperatures, even temperatures in the mid to upper 60s can create fairly significant heat stress for our animals as they're in the milking parlor holding pen. So make sure you get those systems taken care of. Also, a lot of times we spend our time talking about the lactating cows. Need to be paying attention to those animals that are dry. And that includes your far off dry cows as well as your close up dry cows, because there are a lot of good studies out there that show that not cooling your dry cows during the summertime results in a significant reduction in milk production of those animals when they become fresh. So if you haven't got systems out there, you might want to look into how you might do that. You have systems for your dry cows as well as your transition cows. Again, maintenance of those systems should be done just as soon as possible. This is Mike Brook, K-State Research and Extension, urging our dairy farmers to be checking out the cow cooling systems on their dairies.
All right, Mike, many thanks to you, and we'll return in just a moment. You're listening to Agriculture Today. Legal and financial concerns surround the day-to-day management of the agricultural industry. Producers, ag creditors, and USDA agencies rely on Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services. If you've received an adverse decision from the USDA or have an ag credit concern, call today, 800-321-3276, or visit us online, Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services, exploring options, generating solutions. Agriculture Today is back now, and along once again for his weekly insight on wildlife management is Charlie Lee, wildlife specialist, K-State Research and Extension. We have an interesting study that you're going to pass along to us today, Charlie. It's about bat and bird losses at wind energy sites and identifying and quantifying those losses with the use of dogs. We'll get into that, but remind us of the impact of wind towers on airborne wildlife.
We've talked several times in the past about the problems that are facing bats, primarily the increased mortality that's caused by the white nose syndrome. That's a fungal disease that's estimated to kill about 600,000 bats a year. Some other information on bat fatalities reported around wind energy facilities have projected estimates that almost equal that loss. But this was a study that looked at bat losses and bird losses around wind energy facilities in California. We know we've had similar problems with some species of birds, with bird populations decreasing almost 30% in the last 50 years. Over 1 million birds a year have been estimated to be lost at wind tower facilities. So this was a study that continued to look at these losses with several objectives. They wanted to compare the dog versus human searchers at wind turbines for their detection rates of birds and bats that were deliberately placed around the turbines, and also to determine whether distance from the turbine and the size of the carcass that was placed had an impact on detection rates. The study was done in California at the Altamont Pass Wind Resource Area, where lots of wind energy research has been conducted. Those facilities are on steeply rolling hills that are grazed by cattle on annual grasses, with ground squirrels as a small rodent, coyotes, badgers, golden eagles, and many other species of mammalian predators and raptors. Bats and birds migrate through that area with a distinct peak in late September and early October. So they sought to maximize the bat and small bird fatality finds by using dog searches for these fatalities during that fall migration period.
What dogs did they use then, to be specific here?
A group called the Conservation Canines from the Center of Conservation Biology at the University of Washington selected dogs from animal rescue facilities for their health, athleticism, ability to work with humans, and willingness to play with toys, and trained those dogs for more than 2 weeks before handing them off in this study. Then 2 dogs worked with 1 trained handler and a data collector. The handlers used global positioning systems. The dogs were leashed. They walked 10-meter wide transects over most of each search area, and the dogs were able to select their paths within 5 meters on either side of the transect, with air scenting for carcasses along the way. Once the dogs had indicated a carcass, the handler identified the carcass, weighed the carcass, and noted the time.
And the inventory those dogs took was then compared to a similar procedure with people?
Yes, very similar with people. Sometimes they went to facilities where carcasses had not been deliberately placed and looked for actual mortality factors. Factors that affected the search detection of bats and bird carcasses was when you looked at bats and birds and then pooling those both species together during the dog detection trial, the outcomes did not differ significantly by body mass. So dogs were able to detect small carcasses, some as small as 1 gram, as well as large carcasses. When they used bats, birds, and pooled them together, the dog detection trial outcomes did not differ significantly by mean distance from the turbine to the carcass. So dogs were able to detect them distant from the turbine as well as close.
And their detection rate was considerably higher than that of humans.
Yes, it was much higher than the humans were able to detect. Compared to human searches, dog searches resulted in fatality estimates up to 6.4 and 2.7 times higher for bats and small birds, respectively, along with higher precision than their human searchers.
So those are significant enough numbers for this to draw attention, it would seem.
I think that we need accurate information when we're planning siting locations for wind energy facilities. If the existing information using human searchers is not accurate and we have better methods available at a lower cost per fatality that's being detected, it seems that we should use the best information available. Dog search teams seem to be something that can be trained in a not an unusually long period of time. These dogs were trained for just over 2 weeks time frame. They've already got a procedure that seems to work. It's going to reveal, I think, a tremendous amount of mortalities than what we had previously expected. And we ought to be working with the best data available.
Once more, those are results of a study out of the state of California, and they were using dogs to detect bat and bird losses around wind energy facilities, and rendered some information that could be helpful looking forward on collecting data on those losses. And Charlie, thanks for sharing the word on this. Wildlife specialist Charlie Lee of K-State Research and Extension. That caps off this Tuesday edition. We appreciate you tuning in and invite you to make use of our podcast service should you miss one of our over-the-air broadcasts any given day. The website you want to pull up for that is agtoday.net. You can listen to a replay of the day's broadcast right there. You can also subscribe to have it downloaded to your mobile device automatically each day via a variety of podcast services. Take advantage of that at agtoday.net. In the meantime, we'll be right back here tomorrow and hope you will as well. Eric Atkinson bidding you a good day for Agriculture Today. This is the K-State Radio Network.